Today's topic is, I think, if I read the remarks right, is educational leadership, a new approach to ensuring high performance of school principals. In a nutshell, the key element of any approach to improving the caliber of educational services are you got to know what the job is. In this case, what does high caliber principaling look like? Recruit the best possible people to start with, provide them with high quality preparation with a large measure dose of clinical practice, support their ongoing learning because except for Tiger Woods, nobody's won their first game they've ever played, and provide workplace conditions that make it possible or more likely that they're going to be able to do what they're capable of doing. As people in the room who know me can attest, I can talk pretty much ad nauseum about any of those things, emphasis on nauseum. So instead, I'm going to talk about something that is essential to any components of the system, and that is assessment. If I'm successful, I'm going to do something that I think is unheard of in the annals of academia. I'm going to be brief and simple. And I apologize in advance if there are any psychometricians in the group, because when you make things simple, sometimes you leave out nuance. Cutting to the chase, the bumper sticker conclusion is that, and you can write this down, there'll be a test on it at the end. The bumper sticker conclusion is educative performance assessments. Again, the answer is educative performance assessments. And I promise I will get to that conclusion. It's just going to take me a while to build a case for it. I'm going to start with 3 basic facts about assessments, and from those basic facts, move on to 2 principles that are sometimes called a new approach, but in fact they're more an alternative tradition because they've been around for quite some time. Basic fact 1. All measurement, which is another word for assessment, has error. Not good, not bad, it's not right, it's not wrong, it's just the way it is. There is error when you use a ruler to measure, when using a thermometer to take one's temperature, when assessing what a kid knows, period. In anything you measure, there is error. The error factor gets greater when you're working with moving parts, like human beings have moving parts. Immanuel Kant put it this way: nothing straight can be built from human timber. That's why you get what is sometimes called the Aunt Emma syndrome. A study is conducted, it says X. But everybody has an Aunt Emma where X didn't happen. For instance, I think we'd probably say there's pretty good evidence that smoking is not good for you. Okay? On the other hand, my father, who never smoked, exercised regularly, ate healthily. What else could you do that's good for you? He lived the way you were supposed to live, died of lung cancer. Okay? Our neighbor smoked every day of his life from morning till night, had donuts for breakfast, Kentucky Fried Chicken, hamburgers and french fries for lunch, and Jack Daniels for dinner. Died 10 years after my father did, not of lung cancer, but in a car accident. No matter what the statistic, no matter what the evidence you have, there's almost universally a counterexample. Just something to keep in mind. The error rate is higher when assessing human beings, moving parts, doing complex tasks. There is less error, for instance, assessing whether someone knows that 2 + 2 = 4 than assessing whether someone can adjust a recipe to feed twice as many people who show up at the last minute for dinner. The error rate is even higher for assessments that are supposed to predict something of a moving part that is somewhat performance related that's going to happen in the future. Sticking with cooking, because I had a great dinner last night at the Congresswoman's house. There is even more error trying to predict whether a person will adjust a recipe accurately several years from now when trying to prepare for a large dinner party. Or, using a football metaphor, there's a scouting combine. And these college players come to the scouting combine and they go through 3 days of assessments and measures, and they're all very precise. And at the end of the day, some high draft picks are stars and some never make it. There's just error in measurement. This means that when you make a decision about an individual based upon a measurement of some sort, you're not going to be right all the time. And if you're trying to assess a complex task, you're going to be right less of the time. And if you are trying to predict the performance of a complex task into the future, you will be right even less of the time. So the question isn't whether the numbers are accurate. They are not. The question is the level of error or uncertainty with which one can live before making decisions based on those assessments. And that is always related to the stakes attached to those decisions. In general, one would hope the higher the stakes, the higher the consequences, the greater the certainty. But it doesn't always work that way. Eisenhower launched D-Day, thankfully successfully, on some very error-prone Farmer Almanac weather reports and predictions. One way to hedge your bets because of this basic fact is to use multiple sources of evidence before making a decision. The more evidence you have, the lower the level of uncertainty. It's what Lee Shulman calls a union of insufficiencies. So back to Eisenhower and D-Day. In addition to the Farmer's Almanac, he also used some error-prone intelligence reports about German troop tanks and error-prone maps of Normandy beaches. Certainty would be nice, but measurement in the numbers generated by measurement cannot provide certainty. One of the biggest problems in education and educational system is that people think assessments can provide what they cannot. On the other hand, waiting for certainty means never being able to act until after the fact. When I was a kid, actually now that I'm a semi-adult, I had a younger brother, and we used to skip stones, and we would have a contest. And so he would skip a stone, and I would skip a stone, and after we both skipped a stone, because I was the older brother, I defined the criteria. I always won. There was great certainty in the assessment, but that's not the way it works in the real world when my younger brother grew up. Basic fact number 2. Assessments or measurements of complex tasks access a proxy for the whole goal. They sample part of the universe, not the whole of the universe. Back to the cooking metaphor. Knowing how to read a recipe and adjust the recipe as needed is probably a pretty good piece of knowledge to have when you're trying to cook a meal. It is not the entirety of cooking dinner, and cooking is only one essential component of the broader goal of a good meal. There is locating and buying the ingredients, knowing how to use the utensils involved, preparing the table or wherever the meat eating is going to be done, and serving the food, even facilitating the social interactions that are an essential component of a good meal, unless one is dining alone. This is important because of the what gets tested, what gets taught syndrome. This is not what is often called an unanticipated outcome. This is absolutely anticipated outcome. Back to that poor kid in the kitchen. The outcome is that if all is focused upon is reading and adjusting the recipe, he'd make a pretty lousy bananas Foster if the banana was rotten. Or his guests or family would have a pretty difficult time eating a wonderfully prepared beef Wellington if it was served in a wine glass without a knife and a fork. The educational examples are obvious. The capacity to read short passages and respond to questions about those passages is a sample or a proxy of our many goals for public education. The proxy are the samples, not the whole, and the whole can be harmed by not understanding that difference. Basic fact 3, measurement or assessments never ever tell you what to do. They don't tell you what they mean. The interpretation of numbers and what the appropriate actions in response to them are not measurement or assessment issues. They are human judgment issues. Don't tell anybody, but I am one of the few remaining living smokers. And if I continue, I won't be for long. I know I should not. I know all the facts, and I could pass any assessment of my knowledge of the facts that smoking is bad for me and it's bad for those around me. And I can be very clear on my goal. I want to quit smoking. And I can assess that goal with a remarkable amount of accuracy each evening. Did I smoke that day? I know my goal and my standard. I have an accurate assessment. But what does it mean when my yes-no assessment every night is no? It just tells me that I smoked that day. It doesn't tell me what to do any better the next day to quit smoking or why I am not quitting. Or take the example of a young pitcher returning from surgery. Let's say his name might be Strasburg, and say he pitches for perhaps a local team that you might be aware of. Let's collect all sorts of historical assessments about pitch counts and injuries and career expectancy. We would have lots of assessment data, but it doesn't really predict what will happen if he pitches a lot more or a lot fewer innings, or is even less precise in predictability when it's a few more innings here and there. And that doesn't even begin to take into account the balance between long-term and short-term issues for him and for the team. Could the team win the World Series if he pitched more innings this year? Will they ever have this good a chance to win the World Series in the future? Ultimately, these are all human decisions that require juggling multiple factors, multiple variables, and all with imperfect precision.